Should the Song of Solomon be in the Bible? A lot of people look at that book and they say, man, that seems a little bit racy. It seems a little bit inappropriate, the language, the images that are being portrayed between a man and a woman. So they wonder, did we make a mistake? Does God really want this book in the Bible? We're going to talk about that next at the midweek snack. So should it be in the Bible, the Song of Solomon? If you ask that question, I just want you to know you're not alone. This has been something that has been a debate, a thing of controversy for many centuries. For example, in the first century, you had Jewish scholars that looked at this book and they said, this cannot be about a man and a woman. This cannot be a love poem. It has to be something else. So they chose to make it an allegory of basically the relationship of God. God's the man, and the woman is Israel. And they said, this is a story about God's love for Israel, his covenant with them, and ultimately the completion of what's known as the Torah. There were even people there. There was a rabbi named Akaba who once wrote that if anybody sang this song as if it were a ditty about a man and a woman, that they would not make it to the afterlife. In other words, they wouldn't make it to heaven, because that's how serious it was for people. They struggle with that imagery. In the second century, you had Christian scholars that came around, and they too also said, I think this is an allegory, but I don't think it's an allegory about Israel and God. I think it's about Jesus and the church. So in that theory then, the man is Jesus and the woman is the church. And it's simply about God's love for people, which is often communicated, by the way, in marriage. So you're not alone. I was reading about a man named Jerome in the 5th century. He was so against the idea that this could possibly be a love poem between a man and a woman that every time he started to get these kind of thoughts, when he read that book, he would actually throw himself into thorn bushes. And he did that as a regular practice. Now, I don't know how successful that is. I know that it would hurt, but the point is why is this book in the Bible? Should it be there? So we're going to look at the book a little bit, just going to go through it. It's like a little overview, because it is there. Nothing we can do about it. It's there. And so we have to ask ourselves, is this book appropriate? What's being communicated in here? And is the interpretation that it is an allegory between Christ and the church, or Israel and God, is that accurate? And what you're going to find is later on, when the modern age started to come, that theory started to shift, especially in the 1800s during the Enlightenment, because that was a time period where people said, hey, this is what we believe for a long time, but maybe we should go back and rethink this and see if we really do believe this. And so you have what's called the Enlightenment, right? You have people that would look at, for example, Bible passages, and they would look at what the Bible says about creation, and they would ask themselves, okay, do we think this is true, or do we think that maybe it doesn't communicate what we now know today in our modern technology? And that's always been a question. That's always been an issue. And so when you look at it from that perspective, they looked at the Song of Psalms, or the Song of Songs, and they simply said, I think this is not an allegory. Because most of the time when you see an allegory, like in Genesis or Galatians chapter 3, the author usually spells it out. And it's usually really, really clear. And Paul says in Galatians, now this is an allegory. And he talks about Hagar and Sarah and Mount Sinai and the New Jerusalem and Mount Zion. It's clearly meant to communicate something. And it's using these things, these items, these images to basically communicate another truth. So How about now? Today, most scholars, most people in this century, most people that are the modern theologians, they look at this book and they say, you know what? We got to call it what it is. It is a love poem between a man and a woman. Okay? So if we go with that, let's look at this for a second. Okay? So the first question you have to ask is, well, who wrote this book? The first book of the Song of Psalms says this. It says, the Song of Songs, which is Solomon's, right? And so you would think, okay, here it is right there. It's the very first verse. It's talking about Solomon. So Solomon must have wrote this book. But here's the problem. Solomon wasn't necessarily your greatest representative of talking about an exclusive relationship. Because as we know, Solomon had 700 wives and 300 concubines. And so in this story, it communicates this love, this undying love, this devoted love to these two individuals. And so Solomon off the bat, like, wow, that just doesn't feel right. And so you have to keep probing and exploring, like, what do I think it is? Can this be a story about Solomon? Because that was also one of the initial interpretations, was this is about Solomon when he married this Shulamite woman. And they will say things like, this must have been at the beginning of his reign, you know, when he was pure, when he was innocent, when he wouldn't have done anything inappropriate, you know. Later on, he just wanted to make alliances with other nations, and so he's willing to compromise. But many scholars will say this must have been Solomon's first love. And some people say, well, this was the Queen of Sheba. But most people now think today, you know, this is a Shulamite woman. She's from the region of Lebanon, somewhere in there, northern Israel. So that's one thing that you have to understand, that people wrestle with. Is this written by Solomon? And is this actually describing the marriage of Solomon because he didn't have a good track record? And so those are the things you have to discover for yourself, and you have to pray about it, and you have to work through it. You have to read this book like over and over and over and over again. And I think for myself, I kind of side with, this is a collection of poems, not specifically about Solomon, but when it says that the Song of Songs, which is Solomon's, I look at that and I say it's in the tradition of Solomon. You know, Solomon was like this guy of wisdom, of literature and songs. It says that he wrote 1,005 songs. And it's interestingly, this song is entitled Song of Songs, which basically means it is the best of the songs. It's the very best, the top notch. It's like saying Jesus is the King of Kings, or when you go to the temple, there's the holy place and then there's the most holy place. That's the kind of Hebrew idiom that's being used there when it comes to the title. So I want to go ahead and look at this passage because I think there's a lot of things there that we can learn from. And as we go through it, I just want to let us, make us sure that we have like an open mind as we go through this. And I want to just say this from the very beginning. This is coming from a Hebrew perspective. And many times when we think about like issues of men and women, we think in terms of the Western mindset. And there are things sometimes in the Western mindset that, especially when it comes to God's people, they say, this is appropriate to talk about, this is not appropriate to talk about. So this is called Hebrew poetry. And one time I was a poet, so I really appreciate some of the imagery here. I think it's quite beautiful. But you have to look at it again and you have to think through it and say, what are they communicating here? And so in one of the verses in Song of Psalms, verse 4, or chapter 4, verses 2 through 3, this is how this man describes his future bride, how he describes her teeth, okay? Now again, you have to look at this from a Hebrew perspective. It says, your teeth are like a flock of shorn ewes, or little lambs, that have come up from the washing, that are cleansed, that are cleaned, all of which bear twins. Now, that doesn't seem like a compliment, right? You're saying, hey, your teeth are like sheep. But what he's saying is that they're white like sheep that have just been washed away, and they bear twins. And he goes on to say, and not one among them has lost its young. In other words, your teeth are all there. No one is missing. No teeth is missing. Your teeth are intact, and they are white. They are washed like white lambs, and they're beautiful. And then he goes on and says, in your lips are like a scarlet thread. What does that mean? Well, you got to take a stab at it, but I think it communicates kind of the idea that her lips, and I look at like the top of the lips, and I think about it's like penciled in, like her lips are so beautiful, they're so defined, it's like a scarlet thread has been outlined over them. So that's an example of Hebrew poetry, and it's going to use illustrations that you're not familiar with because it's going to be talking about some of the sites and some of the scenery that's in the Middle East area. And so that's important for you to know as we wrestle through this, right? And so as you look at this story, this I believe, which is a series of poems that are written about a couple. It's one couple in specific. I think that what you have is you have this couple that pass through different stages. At the first, they desire each other, but they're not married yet. And then later on, everything leads up to the marriage. Things are pretty good. And the honeymoon. And then you get to this point where in the relationship where you're maturing in your marriage. And there are some situations and some issues that have to be worked through, which happens like in every relationship that you have to go through. So at the beginning of this psalm, in chapter 1, verses 5 and 6, we read about the insecurity of the future bride. The insecurity. She looks at him and she says, I am very dark but lovely, O daughters of Jerusalem. Like the tents of Kedar, like the curtains of Solomon. Do not gaze at me because I am dark, because the sun has looked upon me. My mother's sons were angry with me, and they made me keeper of the vineyards, but my vineyard I have not kept. In other words, what she's communicating is she doesn't really feel secure about the way she looks. And as anybody who starts to pursue a relationship, sometimes you have these insecurities that come in here, right? But when you describe the relationship that's being communicated in this particular song, you'll find that every time she feels insecure, the man, the husband, comes and he gives her what she needs, and that's affirmation. And so affirmation is talked about in 1 Solomon 5 through 6. He looks at her and he says, O most beautiful among women, I compare you, my love, to a mare among the Pharaoh's chariots. Isn't that beautiful? A mare amongst the Pharaoh's chariots. Your cheeks are lovely with ornaments, your neck with strings of jewels, right? Something about her look, her cheeks, and something about the necklace and the jewelry that she wears. It's like he has to communicate to her that not only is she beautiful, but he says, you are the most beautiful among women. And whenever we're in a relationship, there are periods where we're going to have to really affirm someone as they get insecure about their appearance, as they start to think, you know what, I don't attract you like I used to attract you. You don't give me that kind of attention. And the important thing to know is that whatever the situation is, there's always insecurity in relationships and the need for affirmation from the other particular significant other. So as we go on with this, there's also themes about longing, losing, and searching. And this happens twice in her dreams. She loses this man and she searches for him. And so this is what she says in chapter 3, verses 1 through 4. On my bed by night, I sought him whom my soul loves. I sought him, but found him not. I will rise now and go into the city, into the streets, and in the squares. I will seek him whom my soul loves. I love the emphasis on soul. It's the intrinsic kind of beauty. I sought him, but found him not. The watchmen found me as they went about in the city. And basically she says, have you seen him whom my soul loves? Scarcely had I passed by them when I found him whom my soul loves. And then she goes, and I held him and I would not let him go. Again, you get this painting, this picture of this relationship of longing and desire. And you're going to get commitment there. And so this is really important when we're looking at this, especially because it leads to marriage and ultimately growing through the marriage. It's important just to kind of focus in on that reality. And so another theme that is really repeated there, and the woman tells the ladies of Jerusalem, who's like the third character in the story. It's like the chorus. There's these ladies that she's talking to. I think she's instructing them as she's going through the situation in her life herself. And I love this theme here. I think it's so important for us today. I really do. And basically it is, do not awaken love before it's time. And you see that in Song 3:5, where it says, I adjure you, daughters of Jerusalem. Remember, she's like instructing them. And she's instructing us as well. By the gazelles or the does of the field, that you not stir up or awaken love until it pleases. That's so important, especially in the beginning of a relationship when you're not married. Oftentimes you're testing the boundary waters, if you will, seeing how far you can go. And sometimes you go too far. And I have been a single pastor when I lived in Portland. And there were couples that went too far. And the hard part is once they crossed the boundary, once they crossed like that sexual boundary, just going to be honest here, they not only didn't go out anymore, but they struggled being friends because they realized that they gave away the most intimate part that they could ever give someone. And it didn't work out. And there are many people today in our culture that have given themselves to people and it didn't work out. And I like this analogy, like there are people that have a part of you walking throughout this culture. And so it's important not to awaken love before it's time. And that's what she's communicating here. So we go on to some other themes in here. Probably number one on the top of the list for this man is he really wants to communicate how beautiful she is. And when you read this, you're going to say, well, I don't know if that really sounds beautiful, but trust me, this is deeply beautiful. And so in Song of Songs 4:1 and following, this is what's said of his beauty. He says, behold, you are beautiful, my love. Behold, you are beautiful. Your eyes are doves behind your veil. Your hair is like a flock of goats leaping down the slopes of Gilead. I know what you're thinking. Your lips are like the scarlet thread, and your mouth is lovely. Your cheeks are like halves of a pomegranate behind the veil. Yeah, she said your cheeks look like pomegranates. And your neck is like the Tower of David, built in rows of stone. On it hang 1,000 shields, all of them shields of warriors. Come with me from Lebanon, my bride. Come with me from Lebanon. So right off the bat, it just appears that this woman is from Lebanon, not a queen of Sheba. And it also appears like this is just kind of two people. And if you look at this psalm, you almost get the impression that this man is actually a shepherd. And maybe she's even a shepherdess because that's being communicated. But it doesn't matter whether she was royalty or whether she was the lowest of the life, because shepherds were not considered high prioritized occupations. This man says, you are the most beautiful thing to me. And I want to share a picture here just because I want to communicate the importance of understanding we can't take this literally. And sometimes that's how we take this, right? Because it's poetry and it's Hebrew poetry. And so some of the things that he mentioned about this woman was, for example, he talked about her hair being like goats that are running down the mountains of Gilead. Now, in that territory, in that country, that was like one of the most awesome things that you can see at a certain time when the sunlight was going down. And there was just a little bit left that these sheep would run together in herds and flocks, and they would run together. And of course, sheep have kind of fur that's kind of wavy a little bit. And so the idea here is that she has flowing hair, kind of like the herds that flow down the mountain of Gilead. It also talks about her eyes are like doves, right? And this picture communicates just the literal aspect of it. But the point being is that if you know anything about a dove is a bird that cannot look to your left or to your right from a peripheral vision standpoint. They are the birds that they look at you specifically. The only way they can look in another direction is to move their head. And so you get this idea of focus. I'm focused specifically on you. And have you ever talked to people that are distracted sometimes and their eyes go veering to this way or this direction because they're looking at something else? Well, when it comes to the eyes of a dove, they can only look straight at you unless they obviously twist and turn their head. And so again, it's kind of communicating this idea of exclusively my focus is on you and your beauty. He talks about her cheeks being like half of pomegranates on her face, right? But the whole idea simply is, hey, you got nice rounded cheeks. And pomegranates were like the delicacy of the day, right? It's kind of beautiful and succulent, kind of given that kind of vibe there. And she talks about her neck. Right? Your neck is like the Tower of David. And so what's she communicating there, right? Because the first thing you're thinking, she has a really long neck. But I think when you look about the Tower of David is, it's where you hang shields and armor and that. And it's like, there's a certain kind of like fortress feel where you have those things so that you can't be invaded. Other people can't come into your life. And this woman has this neck of confidence and of security where she's just not going to let anybody in except for the people that she wants into her life. And so those are some of the imageries. Your lips are like scarlet thread. I mentioned kind of the outlining of the top of the lips so that your eyes are focused on just the beauty of that. And so that's Hebrew poetry. It communicates something to the people that they would understand that is actually a compliment and not a knock on your appearance. Because they go on later to say that her nose is like the Tower of Lebanon. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm really sensitive on the nose thing, so I'm thinking she has a big nose. But no, it's communicating something else. It's communicating something that's prestigious, something that just draws your attention. Okay, so we talked about beauty. We talked about that. Now let's talk about the marriage, okay? Because this is about a marriage. This is about a couple that they're very attracted to each other, and they're probably like, in their teens because they got married a lot earlier than they get married here, right? And so you have those hormones that are probably more alive than probably in the West, where people now are starting to get married in their mid to late 20s for the first time. And so as far as beauty goes, he looks at her and he says at the wedding, you have captivated my heart, my sister. My bride, you have captivated my heart with one glance of your eyes. Remember, she has the dove eyes, the eyes that just look directly at you. With one jewel of your necklace. Okay, she's adorned. How beautiful is your love, my sister, my bride. How much better is your love than wine. And again, he's commenting her beauty, right? But he's not fixated on her beauty. It's just a part of the whole package, because then he's talking about her love. Your love is beautiful. Not just your physical appearance, but your love is beautiful. And again, it's communicating this thing about, my love is specifically dedicated to you. I love you. And I'm not going anywhere. And so that's, again, an important theme when it comes to marriage, is just this idea of that. But now, after the wedding, we get to the stuff that makes us feel uncomfortable. We get to the items that we say, that shouldn't be included in the Bible. But it is. It is included in the Bible, because when it comes to a man and a woman that gets married, sexual expression is going to be something that will be communicated. And that was always God's intention. I know it's hard to believe, but think about it for a second. When God first made man and woman in the Garden of Eden, there was no sin. There was no corruption. There was no sexual abuse. There was nothing that happened that perverted the beauty of sex. And it says that when he made him so that they were naked and unashamed. And I think that's important here, because the Hebrew mindset goes, this is how it was meant to be. But sin came into the world and now has corrupted it. And now when it comes to our time, we look around and we see that sex has been corrupted, right? People pay, they go to strip clubs. People have people that they call girls or gentlemen. There are people that are just simply, they take something that God meant for good and they spoil it and make it bad. A good analogy is milk, okay? So if you leave a carton of milk on the counter, it's good at first. You get it out of the refrigerator, you have it, it's just pure, right? But what happens when you leave it out? It becomes spoiled. And so a lot of the sin that you see when it comes to sexuality is simply spoiled goodness. Spoiled goodness by sin. Now let's get to the racy stuff, okay? He says to her, your navel is a rounded bowl that never lacks mixed wine. That's kind of makes us uncomfortable. But again, he's expressing to her beauty. And how many times in a relationship, it's a marital relationship, does a woman need to be reaffirmed? And so does a man. Because it's the most intimate and the sensitive part of your relationship. And then he goes on and he talks about, well, you'll see. Your stature is like a palm tree, and your breasts are like its clusters. I say, I will climb the palm tree and lay hold of its fruit. Yeah, we're not used to that kind of language and description. And we tend to look at it like it's dirty, it shouldn't be there, but this is in the context of a marriage. And God created sex. Man has corrupted it. But in its purest form, this idea that you desire someone, you desire to be with them, you desire to be intimate with them, that's not a bad thing unless you abuse it. And it's interesting because that theme in this particular song continues to ring true. Don't awaken love before it's time. There was a song back in the 60s and the 70s that said, don't hurry love. And that's so important here. And so as we continue this thing, we look at the strength of their relationship. And this is toward the end of the book. The strength of their relationship. And I think this is probably one of the most beautiful phrases I've ever listened to or looked at. There's a song by this. I might click that, send that in the video too. But there's a song, and listen to what he says here about their love. First of all, there's the exclusivity. It says, set me as a seal upon your heart, as a seal upon your arm, for love is strong as death. That's a powerful statement. Love is as strong as death. That's pretty strong, right? Because the one thing that we think we are afraid of and we're fearful of is death. Because death has that power. But, Jesus came, of course, and he defanged death in a sense. But she says, your love is as strong as that. That's how powerful it is in my life. And then he goes on and says, jealousy is fierce as the grave. Its flashes are flashes of fire, the fiery flame of the Lord. Many waters cannot quench love, neither can floods drown it. If a man offered for love all the wealth of his house, so think about this being King Solomon, for example. If someone offered all the wealth that they had, at the conclusion of this story, she says, he would be utterly despised. And again, you get this glimpse of how one person focused this woman is. That not even money, not even the most money, could terminate how she feels about this man, because more important than money, right, is love. Love, she says, is more important than death. And so when we talk about this, so what is going to happen next? Well, we have to ask the question again, right? We have to ask the question simply being, is this like a good thing? Should this book be in the Bible? Well, I want to suggest to you that it should. And I think there are several reasons for it. Number one, it talks about in Timothy, it talks about Scripture as God breathed. It's His Spirit. It's His Ruach. And even the people that write the book, Peter talks about that, the authors that wrote Scripture were inspired as they were carried along by the Holy Spirit. And so this is not just man's concoction. And many people have struggled throughout the years to say, this should be in the Bible, this shouldn't be in the Bible. And this book right here has stood the test of time, because when it comes to marriage, the Bible treats it as the second most important decision you're ever going to make. In fact, when there's this section in Ephesians 5 where they're talking about the husband and the wife, and the husband's to love his wife like Christ loves the church. And then, of course, there's that section there where a woman should submit to her husband, which is a whole nother controversy, right? He concludes that whole discourse on marriage by saying, hey, I'm not even talking about marriage right now. I'm talking about Christ's love to the church. Because the idea here simply is that just as a man is supposed to love his wife as Christ loved the church, consider her holy, consider her blameless, that's how we're supposed to love our spouse. We're supposed to treat her in that way. And Christ is the model of a love that is so perfect that He loves us unconditionally. So that's my take on a very difficult subject, but I think it's worth asking. And I hope that that is satisfactory. If not, hey, the most important thing is that you have an answer for the hope that you have. Until next time, I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.